Hello, Pat. Hello, Michael. You both have really rich backgrounds and you've led quite diverse lives. And I'm wondering if you can tell us why you decided to live off grid. What was that moment and what were the reasons for choosing this type of life?
Well, for me, it started in 1976, which is a long time ago now, when my then husband and I decided to live without the trappings of society, or see if we could live without the trappings of society, like dustbin men and food in the supermarket. And, well, we did have a car, so we never went that far. Anyway, so we bought a small holding in mid Wales, which was the only place where we could afford to buy anywhere with land. It wasn't for any other reason, to be honest. We failed to notice that in 1976, the whole country was dry, apart from this little patch of land that we bought in Wales, which was green. However, that was because it floods where we bought, and so it was rich and fertile land from the runoff from the floodwaters. Okay, so that's why we came out. Also, it followed a trip of us to some relatives in California, where the person we were staying with healed people through food. So we became interested in food for health. So we decided we needed to grow our own food in order to get the right food in the right condition for ourselves.
Is this because you were dealing with like health conditions, or had you previously eaten a healthy diet?
I can't say I'd ever thought about diet particularly before, but I suffered a lot from hay fever and other mucus type conditions. So Eileen, who was our consultant in California, gave us a diet sheet, and I followed it, and I didn't have hay fever anymore. And my husband suffered from sort of hyperthyroidism. So he would be going round and round in circles and not achieving very much mentally. And he's also suffered from some depressions. And yes, we found it was so beneficial. We couldn't not do it. So that's me.
And how did you decide to get into this lifestyle, Michael?
Well, I didn't really, because I sort of more or less, when I wasn't at an English boarding school, we basically lived off grid in high up in the mountains of Norway, in a sort of extended log cabin. And actually, we weren't quite off grid, to be honest. We had a hot plate, which was quite an innovation. And we had an outside tap, which if you pump the pump long enough, we sometimes got water. And we had an outside loo, which is about 80 yards away from the house. So that was like home, really. So when I no longer needed to work in London, I just decided, well, I might as well go back to my roots and live in the hills, and and I'm not inherently civilized anyway. I don't actually like civilization very much. I like people and socializing, but the more time I can spend out with civilization, the better, really.
So you feel much more comfortable in the hills?
I feel a different person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even cooking on fire and carrying your water.
Yeah, it was wonderful childhood, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So instead of going back to the hills of Norway, you came to Wales. Was there any reason for that?
That was just, it was the nearest I could find to Norway, really, without going back to Norway, basically. So I looked at this one house and just bought it. As simple as that. It was also actually an experiment to see what it would be like just to move from my roots in Sussex to anywhere and see what happened. And gradually life starts up. It's extraordinary. But it was interesting. So now I know I could live anywhere. I could live in Mongolia and I'd be fine.
You have the experience of starting.
Yeah.
And you could start again,
Yeah.
looking at the environment, the climate, what the needs are.
Whatever. Yeah.
Well, this house is amazing. I mean, did you say it's 500 years old?
I would say
Probably.
that, yeah.
Yeah.
Give or take a few hundred years, probably.
So you've worked with the initial frame of this house and built an addition on and put in a lot of
Infrastructure.
energy infrastructure, water infrastructure. What were the initial steps and challenges for, well, I want to ask for each of you.
Yeah, what would you say?
Yeah.
I think for me, it was the finding out that nature demanded its own work ethic.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you just can't not do things at the time that nature says you have to do it.
Right.
When you're growing things, for instance, it's no good thinking on Monday morning, I'm going to harvest the tomatoes, and you go out there on Monday morning and they're not ripe, so you can't. You know, so you have to work with nature all the time. So that was a very big learning curve. You think you're coming out to the country to be free and do whatever you like whenever you like. That's true. It's not really like that. Not if you want to grow your own food.
Yeah, you're completely dependent actually on the patterns of the wind and the rain and the sun.
And you get to know your place. So you get to know what's appropriate at what time, you know, because each individual property or patch of land is different from another one. So although you can take your learned skills, you can't necessarily do exactly the same somewhere else as you did in the first place.
So it sounds like there was a deep or long process of getting to know the place where you are inhabiting and living on a totally more profound level.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Would you say that you have a kinship with the nature here, or what is that relationship like? How has it grown and come alive?
But for me, ever since we moved away from suburbia in 76, it was growing things organically. So it's getting to know what the organic balance of the land is. And although you may have to do interventions to start with, as the years progress, you get to know a bit more about your plot, and then you can do things slightly more organically than perhaps you could in the beginning. So it's getting the land back into balance, which probably, if it hadn't been grown organically beforehand, it wouldn't be in balance.
It would be all out of balance.
Yeah, maybe more or less, you know, but it won't be in balance. So we had millions and millions of slugs here, for instance, and snails to start with. And it was a real job to try and grow something that didn't get eaten. But now it's okay. You know, it gets itself managed. It's self-managed.
There are a few slugs in harmony with the overall
pattern. It's fine.
place. They can have their little bit, and you can have what you need.
Sort of, yes. Of course, when the plants are very small and tender and vulnerable, you learn how to protect them from danger. So I grow them in modules and don't put them out until they're big enough to withstand the ravages of nature. Things like that. That's what we have to do here. We don't necessarily have to do it in another part of the country.
Right. We're in beautiful, wet, vibrant Wales
with lots of stone walls where things can hide in. So I don't know about Michael on that score.
Yeah, well, we have a pond which produces literally hundreds of frogs. So they help to control the wildlife. And we have a cat, which is quite an important part of vegetable growing, because she controls the wildlife.
Yeah, she's quite a prolific hunter.
She takes life pretty seriously, except in the winter, but that's okay.
When you need her hunting, she's out there.
Yeah, she is. She is. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
In terms of the infrastructure of the house.
Oh, that's Michael's department.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about the initial steps and challenges here. It's an amazing story.
Well, the first thing we did was build a house, because the bit we're in now we built with an extremely sophisticated building contract. In that I was chatting to our neighbour David, who's a farmer, outside in the garden, and he said, "Have you got a builder yet?" To which I said, "No, I haven't got around to it, haven't got that far yet." To which David said, "Well, would you like me to do it?" So I immediately said yes. So we built the house with me and David and Pat as support staff, David's son, who was about 16, and miscellaneous members of the community. And we had so much fun. And it was because I got a background in the film business, I'm really quite into this idea of what's called the servant manager, that teams can work really well if you've got a manager who understands that his job is to support the people who are doing the actual work. That works. If our National Health Service could learn that, it would be a completely different organization. And then we did do something interesting, which we employed a really distinguished and expensive architect just to elaborate our basic idea. And that actually saved us a lot of money. And we had really professional drawings and things. So that was good. Yeah, and then the one thing's come after another, really.
Well, at that point, we weren't at all off-grid, were we? We didn't.
No, we weren't.
No.
No.
Then we put in the solar tubes.
Yeah.
Because this is way back before PVs were commonplace. So we put in the solar tubes for the solar water heating.
And then a thermal store.
Oh, so Michael did the thermal store.
And with a thermal store, you can have a completely outrageous number of solar tubes, because they would actually blow up a normal heating hot water cylinder. But because the thermal store is 450 litres of water, it can heat it up to 90 degrees if it likes, and you just store that heat in the summer.
Yeah, you showed me the thermal store yesterday. So this cylinder is taller than a person.
Yeah.
Fatter than a person.
Yeah.
Some people.
450 liters of water in it.
So, yeah.
And it's getting heat from the solar tubes, as well as the wood burning stove.
Yeah.
The wood burning stove releases heat to the room it's in, but also heating
jacket of water around it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's a boiler behind it.
There was another place.
And it gets heat from the photovoltaic panels, which are relatively new, which generate electricity. So they can run the immersion heater in the middle of the night.
Yeah, you have to be on the right tariff to make sure you've got a supplier that's giving you cheap rate electricity overnight.
Yeah.
So we've also got this battery.
So if we have to buy electricity, we pay 7p a kilowatt instead of 40p a kilowatt
During the day.
Right. So you only buy the little bit extra that you would need during the night. And you have now a big Tesla battery that stores the electricity.
That's right.
So just so our listeners can understand, a thermal store is a big tank of water, and it's receiving heat from all these various sources. And then how does that water in the tank actually heat and power the home?
Okay, you'll be amazed how clever it is. It's classic British eccentricity. This engineering is amazing. The bottom of it is always relatively cool because hot water sits on top of cold water. So a pump pumps the bottom water around the radiators whenever we want it to. So we need quite big radiators, which we have. And the water from the top, anytime anyone turns a hot tap on, triggers a heat exchanger, which instantly steals heat from the thermal store and puts it into the cold water and turns it into hot water. So
you have hot water whenever you want.
Yep.
Plentiful amounts. You can run the hot water from the thermal store, which is cooler, but still very hot, through
Yeah.
the radiators
Yeah,
whenever you
great.
want central heating coming.
Great.
And you can have heat from the stove.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then your electricity from the hot water is going into this battery. And
No,
that's what's
no.
no.
No, the electricity is coming from the PV panels,
Uh-huh.
which are a relatively new installation.
Uh-huh.
And so that electricity that's generated by the solar panels goes into the Tesla battery.
Yeah.
And it sits in the Tesla battery until you want to put a light on or whatever.
Mhm.
And then it comes out of the battery and powers the light.
Uh-huh. And
Okay.
if you've used up most of what's in the battery charges itself with a little bit of energy from the grid in the night.
Yeah,
Correct.
Yeah.
but only from the night.
Uh-huh.
And then it does something amazing. You are not going to believe this.
Yeah.
In the middle of the night, it will telephone Elon Musk,
Mhm.
who will tell it what the weather forecast is for next day, on the basis of which it will decide how much to charge itself. So if it's going to be cloudy and dark next day, it'll charge itself quite a lot.
It'll charge itself from the grid.
Mhm.
Yeah,
in the
overnight.
night.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh-huh.
And if it's going to be a lovely sunny day,
It won't bother.
Elon Musk and the battery will jointly decide not to take any electricity because it knows it'll be fine next day.
Uh-huh.
That is genius.
It is.
So sometimes we're quite angry with Elon Musk sometimes when he gets the weather forecast wrong.
It is a bit unpredictable that way.
Uh-huh. But you've never had a time where you just had to sit here in the dark and
Well, we just put the light on and pay the extra.
yeah, yeah.
I think what's so good about that, the system with the battery, is that you don't have to think, oh, it's sunny, I better put the washing machine on,
Right.
because you know that you can put the washing machine on at any time because
Mhm.
you've got stored electricity.
Yeah.
So it takes all that worry away of, that wasted electricity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the living off grid is actually less stressful because you have fresh air and wind and water and space and all of that. But it's
Yeah.
also less stressful because your energy supply is actually more stable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And our water also is off grid.
Yeah.
So we've got a spring,
Mhm.
which has caused us anxiety this summer because
Mhm.
we haven't had a lot of rain. So,
Yeah.
So apart from that,
Yeah.
we're fine.
What's amazing about the spring, not only does the water taste amazing and you feel great,
Mhm.
but you were saying, Michael, that it only needs to trickle
Yeah.
for there to be enough.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be a gushing river.
No.
Just a little bit
No.
from the earth is enough,
Mm.
which to me has profound philosophical
Mm.
Yeah.
implications,
Mm.
It does require a lot of digging because you haven't seen it, but there's a really huge water storage tank up there,
Mhm.
which an old fool called Len and we decided to see what it would be like to dig by hand. We took a couple of spades and thought we'd just take a couple of spits out.
Mhm.
But because we're both crazy, we just carried on digging until we dug this enormous hole.
Uh-huh.
That's where the water is.
Uh-huh. So there's an actual tank in the hole. It's not a hole made of mud.
And there's
no.
concrete.
It's concrete.
And with a special painted on surface that is
Uh-huh.
toxic proof and waterproof.
Okay. Okay.
But we drink directly from the spring.
Okay. The drinking tap is directly from the spring, and the water for
Washing up and etc. is
showers.
comes
So-
from the tank.
Uh-huh.
So if anyone wants to do this, it gets complicated because you've got like two sets of plumbing systems really running.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
it can get complicated.
But you've basically taught yourself, haven't you?
With
Yes.
the help of the internet.
Yeah.
When I started doing my own plumbing in London and everything, there was a company down the road called Sprat, and Sprat, which was a plumbing company.
Uh-huh.
And the thing is, if you don't bullshit, if you just go and say, look, I need to put in a new hot water system, but I don't know how to do it, they'll spend forever telling you how to do it. So
Yeah.
that was really how I learned.
Yeah.
And that was grandfather Sprat, great grandfather Sprat, father Sprat, and little Sprat.
Only in this country. I love it.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So let's take a little sidetrack here. Tell me a little bit about how the two of you met.
Me.
Well, I can remember how we met.
Mhm.
We used to have a meditation class in the barn.
You did, not me.
I did.
Mhm.
It went on for years. And one night this person walked in. And it's actually, life is amazing because just something jumped in here. I had no idea what it was, but I definitely felt something jump. Anyway, that was Pat. And things went on from there, really. I'd been on my own for years. So that's my story.
Yeah, my story is that
You were late and on the phone, by the way.
Oh, I always am. Yeah, I always was in those days. What's my story? Let me think. Oh, yes. I've been interested in yoga for a long, long time. And I've just been going through a period where I didn't have a Sangha, a community around me or places to go to talk those sort of subjects. So I was feeling a bit that I needed that. Anyway, a friend of mine told me that there were some meditation classes going on, and she and I decided to go. And that's where I met Michael. I walked into the barn here. Actually, for a start, you get to the top of the hill and you think, my God, who can possibly live in such a beautiful place? And turned out to be Michael. That's how it began, really. But it took a long time. We didn't. I didn't move in here for another 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
So that was us. And while I was interested in yoga, Michael was interested in Sufism. So they're so similar in lots of ways that we had quite a lot in common.
Exactly. Tell us a little bit about your spiritual path and the yoga and the lineage that you're connected to.
Yeah. Okay. I started to practice yoga when I lived in Paris. Wanted to do something non-competitive. Saw a sign up for a yoga class, so I thought I'd try. And we had a very nice yoga teacher, a bit like you actually, thinking about it. She was. And it was all in French, but it was fine, so I could manage that. And then when I came back to the UK, I again sought out some yoga classes, again found somebody quite interesting to have classes with. She, I suppose, saw potential in me and invited me to become her stand-in when she was not teaching. So I started to teach. And then I did a yoga, it was Yoga for Health Club's training course to become a teacher. Then we had an Indian Swami who came from his ashram in Holland through a contact of his to teach or to develop a group just around the corner from where we lived, which was unheard of. It's just absolutely unheard of. Anyway, so I was invited to go to where he was staying, and he just said to me, you come here tomorrow at this time. And I said, but I can't, I've got so much to do. We were running a little farm at that time, and animals to feed and all that. But somehow or other, I was always there whenever he said he would be here. So anyway, he not only taught the Hatha Yoga, which is the asanas, the physical postures, but he taught very deeply the philosophy behind it all. So that was the interest for me.
Yeah.
And what interested me most about it, what it sort of confirmed how I felt deeply within. So there was a deep resonance that what he was telling us about made so much sense and spoke to me. Gave me quite a lot of confidence, really, that I was okay as a person. It was, yes, it was fine, because my marriage was going through quite a difficult period. So it was wonderful. And we formed an organization, and the rest is history, really. It's still there in the UK.
Yeah, what are the chances that an Indian Swami comes to settle in Wales?
Yeah, well, excuse me, he didn't settle in Wales. He was only here for 2 weeks every year.
Oh.
But we only met him a few times, but he insisted we go to Holland for their conferences, probably for 4 or 5 years before he died.
Yeah.
We had quite a lot of contact with him.
Mm-hmm.
And then an organisation grew in the UK from that basis. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very profound.
Very profound. Your understanding of the Yoga Sutras is quite deep.
Mm.
And I'm wondering how that's related to your relationship with land and earth.
Well, I suppose land and earth are the same as we are. You know, they're just as divine as we are. So if you look after the earth, you look after yourself. You know, and it's not only yourself, it's the whole of society. So if we think that we are the same as everybody else, you know, we have divinity is within everything. So it's that connection with divinity really that makes you grounded to the earth, because the earth needs us, but we need the earth more than the earth needs us. So that's always been our philosophy of growing things and tending, nurturing the earth and looking after it. So when Michael puts a pile of earth, of rubbish on something that's growing, you know, I get really quite angry, don't I? So we have to move it off so that the earth can do it. You know, the worms, etc., can still have their little homes. Instead of being squashed and pushed. You know. So you have to be.
So there's a deep reciprocity with the divinity of everything, even the earthworms. Yeah.
Especially the earthworms. Without the earthworms, you wouldn't have the soil structures and all the microbes in it, which feed us all. Every cell of our body needs that food in the right, you know, in its right form.
Right. This is such a wonderful understanding that those of us who have been living in cities and towns just miss, like in terms of also the spiritual path, pursuing a deep spiritual understanding or an ecstatic experience. And when we bring it right back down to the earthworm, the components of the soil are actually the basis of life and actually therefore divine, the basis of divinity. That sort of turns all of our seeking and our need for big experience right on its head.
Well, for me, it does. Yes. Yeah. I'm not saying that everybody's path is the same, but for me, I don't have a longing for the big experience. I prefer to put it into the, you know, make the connection through everything. Yeah.
Well, it just shows when you talk about the garden and when you talk about your spiritual practice, your eyes light up in the same way. And it's such a beautiful light.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Can't help it. Michael's path was completely different.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about your spiritual path. So you've been leading meditation classes, but there's a big context.
Yeah. Yes, I think I have a much more stubborn approach. I've been much more stubborn. I spent 20 years making documentary films when we were kind of trying to change the world. We nearly killed ourselves, but there was no conscious spirituality really. But at the same time, I think it's possible that I directed the first documentary about global warming for television. It wasn't shown in the UK, but it was shown in more than 50 other countries, I think. And then we did an outrageous political program about mainstream politics, which mostly involved interviewing a Buddhist monk and a famous environmentalist called Jonathan Porritt. How we got away with it, I don't know. But it was a real battle. But then after about 20 years, I couldn't do it anymore. It was just completely, it was a huge fun and a huge adventure, but completely exhausting and financially quite impossible. And then I spent a year everybody in my family decided I ought to have a proper job. So I had a year of, I would actually describe it as hell, working for one of the world's biggest public relations companies. So I was supposed to help sell almost every disgusting product that nobody would really want. Everything, junk food, nuclear energy, everything. And in the space of a very short time, I managed to lose my job and my wife and my house and my family and my money, everything else. It pretty much disintegrated. And then, which in hindsight, of course, was the best thing that could conceivably have happened. But at the time, it didn't feel like that. And then one day, a wonderful woman friend in London said, "What are you doing next week?" To which I replied, "Nothing in particular." And she said, "Let's drive to Switzerland." And there's this spiritual teacher called Pierre Inayat Khan, who is teaching in Switzerland. So we turned up high up in the Alps, and there was this enormous tent with about 200 crazy Sufis in it. And I went into the tent, and Pierre Inayat came in, and everybody stood up, and it was all terribly formal. And then we all sat down in total silence. This guy started to teach. And for the first 20 minutes, I remember sitting there thinking, this guy is completely nuts. And then after about 20 minutes, I thought, actually, I think possibly the world is completely nuts. And this guy is actually sane. So it was one hell of an experience, actually. I can remember about several days into this retreat, there was literally, I think, 200 people there. I can remember feeling at one point the most really appalling pain in my heart. And he suddenly turned in my direction, and he just said out of nowhere, you know, sometimes when you follow any kind of spiritual practice, it can feel like you're having a heart attack and that your heart is literally disintegrating. And it felt like a whole lifetime of pain that actually somehow coalesced into those moments. So welcome to the spiritual journey, anybody. If you want to know what it's really like, that's what it can be like. And then later, I was still at a loose end doing building jobs to keep alive. And I met somebody at lunch who said, "Why don't you go and meet Nigel Hamilton, who runs probably the biggest psychotherapy training in this country?" And having nothing better to do, I went to meet Nigel Hamilton. And he said, "Why do you want to be a psychotherapist?" To which I replied, "Well, to be honest, I don't." To which Nigel replied, "Well, in that case, you better come and do the training." And of course, I now understand that people who want to save everybody, and they probably don't last the training anyway. It's not about saving other people, really. So I spent 5 or 6 years there. Amazing experience. And at the same time, I must have done 20, 25 different Sufi retreats, which are the really powerful stuff, really powerful stuff. And then I did the whole leaders training as well. Quite what I've ended up with, I'm not sure. It feels like nothing, actually. I don't really particularly believe in anything, whatever. I think I just exist. But it's good fun existing too. It's okay.
You were saying that the other night when we were chatting, it feels like everything's been stripped away, actually. And that's actually quite profound, to be there with a nothingness and an emptiness, which is also a fullness. Like in that emptiness, there's all of existence. And that kind of place takes time and no grasping. You just sort of arrive to there one day. Oh, how did I get here?
Yeah, it's a strange adventure, really. I mean, I feel really jealous of people who have an actual belief in something, but I actually don't. Certainly not with my intellect. I think with my being, I probably actually passionately believe in something, but I'm not quite sure what it is.
Well, that's a huge.
I think you do believe.
Yeah, that's a huge conversation about where human consciousness is evolving in terms of its relationship to religion and spirituality and universal divine connection and unity.
Mm.
You know, personally, I feel that religions came in a time when humanity needed them.
Mm.
If we look really basically, like, did humans need to be told things like "thou shalt not kill"?
Mm.
You know, it's so, we must have really been in some dark places.
Mm.
But as consciousness is evolving, we can move out of that space in big picture view. And as we move towards unity, this connection to our source that we came from, love, it's so beyond words. It's beyond.
Yeah, that's the point, I think.
Yeah.
I had an experience at the end of a retreat once, when I just carried on sitting for a bit. I had an experience of absolutely pure innocence, which was actually really overwhelming. And of course, it may just be a psychological trick, but it felt like some sort of extraordinary memory of somehow, at some level, we have this absolute total innocence. And of course, it can't survive the world very easily. And maybe a lot of the spiritual journey is just about having the courage to reclaim that and to have so much mastery of the incredible difficulties of living that one can remember, one can hang on to it somehow.
I like that, the essence of innocence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
I'm just thinking about all the different things, you know. Tell us a little bit about your daily life. So, what is your rhythm? How do you attend to your basic spiritual, cultural, physical needs? But also, what brings you joy?
I love it. Great question. Great question.
I think the greatest, well, at the moment I have a very young grandchild. Well, she's 3 now, and that's been an enormous experience to actually find that absolute core love, which I think every grandmother I've spoken to has for their grandchildren. Just, I don't know, it's just deep, deep, deep connection and a pure feeling that comes out of you. It just does. It's just, again, perhaps it's the innocence, because the children are fairly innocent at that time when they're little, are very innocent when they're babies. The other pure joy I have is just stopping to look is at something really beautiful and sattvic and elevating, and it's usually nature for me. Something absolutely beautiful. You have a crying dog.
Yeah, we'll let him in because he's also part. All right, Helios brings me a lot of joy. He's not a grandchild, but
No, well, almost.
He is a sentient being who loves and has needs and offers so much wisdom. Your daily life, what is your daily life like in terms of your cultural and spiritual and physical needs, you know, being met together, and what brings you joy?
Okay, you finished? Yeah.
For the moment.
Okay. My daily life routine includes getting up usually about 6 or just before, lighting the stove, feeding the cat, letting the cat in. The cat then has to have morning cuddles because it's been out by itself hunting all night and it's feeling emotionally deprived. And then strong coffee. And then jobs usually. Keeping this place running. It sounds great, self-sufficiency, but there's a lot of work to do. And well, for joy, friends like you, friends really matter actually. Communities that we don't actually take part in the community as nearly as much as we could do, but it does really matter. And the other day I was going backwards and forwards collecting logs from the local woodman, and I met everybody from the village seemingly, and actually we all had just such a wonderful day, and it was great fun. And then what gives me joy is actually playing competitive tennis. I still play tennis for the county. I'm pleased to hear we beat Northamptonshire last week.
Little North Wales.
Yeah, because that feels very important to keep an edge. Actually, it's I used to be very fond of an Indian Ayurvedic doctor who refused to teach Ayurveda unless his pupils also did martial arts, which he did to a very high level, because he said that you need the yin and the yang. It's very interesting. So for my nature, it's important. It's actually important to fight in a way. And a lot of your clients might be absolutely horrified to hear that maybe once or twice a year, I actually still shoot pheasants because it's what my family grew up doing as a country family. And life is complicated. Because of course, it's possibly terribly wicked to shoot pheasants. But on the other hand, it's how the country communities, that's what they do. They don't go to the cinema and the theatre because there isn't any of all that stuff.
Right.
Hunting is even more complicated, which I don't do.
You did have a good period of 30, if not more years of not doing it.
I absolutely did.
Yeah.
And I mean, it gives my brother, who's a country landowner, enormous pleasure when I and my kids turn up for a day shooting. So life is so complicated.
It is. So you're saying the value on reciprocity in terms of your local relationships is actually inherent to joy when you're living close to the earth.
Yeah. There is actually, I mean, there's some really difficult issues actually, because actually shooting a high pheasant in a gale is one of the most impossible things you can do. And it's actually just absolutely mind-blowingly exciting because we have these Neolithic hunting genes.
Right.
I mean, tennis is only a substitute for throwing spears, obviously.
Some of us have more Neolithic.
Let me pound my chest.
Interestingly enough, they now know that some of the Neolithic hunting groups are women. And I played tennis with one of them. She can't possibly be let out to play tennis with men because she'd kill all of them. So you could have been married to her years ago and said, Rachel, go and run down a deer, would you? Because I quite feel like venison for supper. And she it would have been no problem.
Oh my. So there is a continuity between Neolithic living and living here with a Tesla battery.
And of course there is.
Yeah.
Of course there is. Yeah. And you love the wildlife, but you have to kill it sometimes as well, because it can be an absolute bloody nuisance. And wildlife here, we love it to bits, but we don't often get annoyed with it. And we never eat a vegetable all by ourselves, do we? There's always somebody else sharing it with us.
Yeah, so that's right. That's to do with the balance, isn't it?
It is. It is.
A little bit for them and a little bit for us.
I think you two are a marvelous balance for each other.
Well, you've had the potatoes, carefully cutting around the other occupants.
I must say, though, eating the vegetables from your garden is so enlivening. It's beyond nourishing. You can just feel life entering your body.
That's what you feel when you're working the land as well. You feel it. You get your hands in the soil. It's never look at my nails. They're always just black as anything. But yeah, just so good to feel the soil.
Well, I had one more thing I wanted to ask you all, which was you both have an interest and a background in healthcare as well. Pat, you just managed a care team for years of
Yes,
carers
I
going
did.
around all and Michael, you spent years as a psychotherapist.
Mhm.
And one of the links that I don't see being made in a lot of conversation right now is not only between spirituality and land and spirituality and healthcare and land,
Mm.
but I feel these three things are actually intimately intertwined.
Mhm.
That to have healthy bodies, healthy spirits, free of mental illness,
Mm.
free of disease. We need land, spirituality, community, all of it together. And the crisis in our healthcare system wants attending to from a holistic perspective.
If only.
If only.
Mm.
So I thought each of you might have a little bit of thoughts or wisdom to share in bringing this conversation forward a bit.
I think for things to develop in the way that we would like them to develop, it's got to be done through word of mouth or through example and through teaching. And perhaps if little children were taught from a very young age that they had a mind which had its which they could take control of, they could learn that they don't actually have to just do what their mind tells them to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something a very old Swami, old lady, told me would be the solution to a lot of the world's problems.
Mm-hmm.
Is if you can learn from very young that your desires that come up saying, I want this, I want that, can be controlled. And fulfilling your desire doesn't necessarily bring you happiness.
Mm.
So it's in a way a discipline to learn how the mind works.
Mm-hmm.
And how the mind works.
Mm-hmm.
And that the mind is just another aspect of your senses.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Taste, touch, sight,
Mm-hmm.
and mind. It's not who you are,
Mm-hmm.
but you can learn, which is what you do through spiritual practices when you're older. You can learn that it is just the mind.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to do what the mind says. You can discriminate and say, is this desire one that's going to bring lasting happiness, or is it one that's just going to bring transitory happiness?
Mm-hmm.
And the one that always, again, was told to me as an example of, you can be very happy ensconced in a book and reading your book, and you can be in a very, very contented, blissful state. But there comes a time when you know that does not bring you bliss anymore. You actually want something else. Another desire comes up.
Mm-hmm.
So that reading the book desire that you've fulfilled for a short while, you can say, okay, now I don't need to read my book. Although the story may be gripping, you may want to know what the end of it is, you can actually put it down and go and do whatever needs to be done next.
Mm-hmm.
So it's taking a bit of control. If we were taught that, I think it would be a very useful thing.
Mm. Mm. There's so much wisdom in this, and working from the seed upwards. Yeah.
Can't say I do it all the time. One can do it sometimes. Yes.
I would absolutely agree with that. We have a young Indian friend who's a traveling Swami.
Mm-hmm.
And he really knows yoga in the widest sense, the psychology of yoga.
Mm-hmm.
And he is always, unbelievably radiant and sizzling with light and energy. And his life is, if anything, more difficult than most of us. So it can be done. But it's very, very advanced, that, I think.
Yeah, you just take little steps, don't you?
Yeah. But from the point of view of, certainly when I worked for the NHS as a psychotherapist, we were mostly the basic problem was depression always.
Mm-hmm.
And the subject there is so huge, it's very dauntingly huge, because I think what we're doing at the moment, I think actually on the whole, it's almost totally useless. We had filing cabinets full of people referred to us, literally, for whom antidepressants hadn't worked. And I'm not really convinced they ever really work much better than the placebo. And I mean, I'm not a researcher, but I think there are researchers who would agree with that. So to think of the level of corruption that's gone into marketing antidepressants, I mean, it's almost beyond comprehension, really. There's a fashionable thing called cognitive behavioral therapy, which I think is, I mean, even the psychologists I used to work with used to treat it as a joke. It may sometimes work because something else has happened, which, for example, which is a relationship and love in the context of so-called cognitive behavioral therapy. So that might work. I think psychotherapy is actually staggeringly out of date. And if you ask any psychotherapist what they think they're actually doing, you'll get 100 different answers because it doesn't make sense. There are some amazing things psychotherapy can do, like you can actually reparent somebody who's been brought up in an Irish Catholic children's home or something like that. You really can reparent people. It might take 10 years, but you can do it. So we need something just unimaginably different, I think, which one might call a health system as opposed to an illness system. That if somebody's miserable, the main reason why they're miserable is that something's wrong in their life. So it follows from that if somehow one could help them fix whatever's wrong in their life, that might make life a hell of a lot more fun. And what might be wrong in their life is, it might be out there, like they've got nowhere to live, or they haven't got enough money, or they're in debt, or their relationship's falling apart. And it might be in here as well, and actually the two will be connected. So in an ideal world, you'd have people who could help with both. And basically, if you think about it, all these treatments were devised before basically anyone had heard of software. We didn't know what software could do, but we now understand that we have human software. Your dog Helios has Persian dog software, which is pretty similar, but not quite the same. And we basically have mostly chimpanzee software. And the software is brilliant because it tells us what we need. It tells us about very simple things that we need, like food and water. It happens automatically. We don't know it. It just does it. And it tells us about much more subtle things that we need, which are just as important, which are having fun, creativity, work, contribution to the community, friends, and most of all, love. And quite apart from the spiritual tradition, everybody, with the possible exception of psychologists, knows that love is the absolute 100% driving force in life.
Not romantic love necessarily.
No, not romantic love. No, I mean,
maybe every variety of love.
Yeah, every variety.
Familial, romantic, divine, exactly.
I mean,
Self.
sex is like everything else. Without love, it's just pointless.
Another sweeping statement.
Absolutely. Well, let's go for it. Let's go for it. So a lot of people actually need to be taught to love and to be loved as well. That's one of the best things that counseling and psychotherapy can do. So we need to reimagine this whole damn thing. And we could do it because when it comes to sorting out people's life on a practical level, there are all these old retired people who've got all the knowledge in the world and nothing to do. There's an enormous resource there. And so a lot of retired people are terribly depressed because they've got nothing to do. And there's all these young people who don't know how to live or can't solve problems. So, I mean, that could work. So we need something, you use the word holistic, that's what we need. And then, of course, we've got doctors who are simply it's incredible. Only the drugs companies have a sales force. Only the drugs companies have a sales force which is actually paid for by the public. It's absolutely amazing. If you think about it, it's a really good scam, isn't it? So I mean, a lot of GPs are lovely and they try their absolute damnedest. But basically what they're doing is dishing out the drugs company's products or referring to a specialist who might possibly be able to help. So, and interestingly enough, I've actually at the moment got just seen a consultant for a really pretty serious shoulder injury. And he actually offered me to fit a new shoulder for me, which is a very nice guy. Extremely, tremendous integrity, and I'm sure a tremendous expert. But I've actually healed the thing thanks to a holistic GP who's prescribed different food supplements. Can you believe it?
Yeah.
And now I'm playing county tennis with a completely wrecked shoulder and a totally missing tendon. And if you think about it, this is, I mean, it's pretty significant, really.
Yeah.
The cost is a fraction. I haven't had the trauma of a major surgery. And this applies to other times I've been ill. I've only been ill maybe twice seriously in my life. Once I was cured by Chinese herbs, and the second time I was cured by English herbs. It's just ridiculous.
There's so much in what you've just.
I mean, I'm being very full on. I don't want to take away from the medics because some of them are amazing.
Well, also,
but the whole system is basically totally out of date.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're saying this gets to the root of something, because a lot of light is being brought to holistic healthcare, but the steps are still so small. So there is a difference between just saying you should exercise or you should meditate and actually receiving teaching and guidance in the mind. And there is a difference between being prescribed cognitive behavioral therapy and actually entering into a relationship of care and love with the healer and with oneself. And there is a difference between just an idea of holistic living and actually the care and depth that goes together. Thank you.
We've got a mad artist to write.
Thank you so much for this time. Thank you so much, listeners. If you would like to be a part of this podcast, see you all soon.